Wonderful. Well, thank you for being here with us today. We're delighted that you've joined us, and we want to take a moment to introduce ourselves. I'm Maureen O'Connell, and I'm delighted to be here. I've been a teacher for 24 years. The first 18 of them were as a classroom teacher in primary grades, and the last 6 as a math specialist at my school. I had the pleasure of teaching IM during the alpha and beta pilots. During the alpha year, we were in person, which was lovely. And I had my own second grade class, and I supported other grades. And then last year, as we all know, was a unique year. My school had a hybrid approach, so I saw every student from K to 5 on their at-home learning days. And I also had a full year kindergarten and first grade a distance class, so that was a pleasure.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marcelle Good. I'm an illustrative math certified facilitator. I started working with illustrative math in the high school pilot, coaching teachers and supporting school districts. I also am an 8th grade math teacher in Brooklyn, New York, where I taught all last year 8th grade math to different students. And also I had the pleasure of teaching health and sex ed through Zoom at 8:30 every morning with 13-year-olds. Also super excited to see, I am originally from Michigan, so it's so nice to see so much representation from Flint, and I have deep roots in Tennessee as well. So it's nice to see an Upper East Tennessee in here.
Wonderful. And I forgot to say I'm in Ipswich, Massachusetts, but you may have guessed about the Massachusetts. Okay, Marcelle and I are going to share some of our happy experiences using IM in distance learning. And, we just wanted to acknowledge that the distance learning from last year was a difficult time, and that, not all schools have the human resources or the physical material resources to support students the way we're describing. So we just wanted to name that we know everyone's circumstances are different, and just share what worked with us with the students that we were meeting in front of us. So speaking of distance learning, it wouldn't be distance learning without a check-in. Community is even more important. Creating a sense of community at a distance is even more important. So we're going to use a routine that we used every day. Take a look at these adorable pups. How are you coming to this meeting today? What are you feeling? What pup are you? So on the scale of puppiness, I'd like to ask you to use the countdown chat strategy. So you may type in the number, and you know what? I didn't give you directions. This is a very high level group. You can type in the number of your pup and then hold on to it. Don't send it, all right? Because we're going to practice using that it was one of my best moves during remote instruction. So do you have your choice? All right, ready? 3, 2, 1, send it. Oh my goodness. Teresa's a 1. I can see why. So now it looks like we have a great variety. It looks like some people are feeling a tiny bit underwater. We hope that you'll feel inspired and refreshed. Oh, look at 7. I want to be friends with 7, a happy, happy puppy. Well, whatever your positioning is right now, hopefully you can just take a moment to breathe and sit back. And by the end of the session, maybe we'll all be, oh, I don't know which one, maybe number 4, we'll see. Okay. And again, I see some people responding to the host and panelists. If you want your responses for everyone, that would be a great choice. All right, here we go.
At Illustrative Math, we are guided by our vision to bring about a world where all learners know, use, and enjoy mathematics. With this curriculum, we've structured the lessons so that students engage in doing math, sharing their understanding, and connecting and reflecting on their learning. But this curriculum was designed with physical classrooms in mind, where students can be at desks, share with partners, teachers can overhear their conversations, and then sort of, just grab their work, show it to the class, and think about it together. How do we carry out this vision when we're in a distance learning setting? This is what we're going to be thinking about today. And I want to name that throughout this webinar, we're going to share how some teachers have used some tools that are free to teachers to do distance learning with the free version of IM. IM certified partners, Kendall Hunt, LearnZillion, and McGraw-Hill each offer integrated platforms that incorporate some of these and additional features as well if you work with one of our certified partners. So if you do, please be sure to contact them to learn more about the features in their platforms that offer supports with distance learning. Today, we're going to be thinking about a lot of different things. We're going to be thinking first about how to use instructional routines. We're going to be thinking about creating mathematical communities, eliciting student thinking, and then we're going to introduce you to some planning resources. I want to invite you to have a document handy, either digital or paper and pencil, if that's how you work best, just to make a little space for you to reflect as we go. I also want to share again that we're using the chat. So I want to invite you to just have your chat set to chat with everybody. I also want to share that there will be a question and answer session at the end. We invite you to use the Q&A feature to post your burning questions. Take 15 seconds to scan our learning goals for the day. Please type in the chat the number of the learning goal that you're most interested in. That's going to help Maureen and I think about balancing our time, thinking about where to emphasize. We're in a group of people from all over the country who most of whom have never met each other, and there is an overwhelming interest in thinking about making student thinking visible during distance learning. You're going to see a lot of that today, and that's really probably where we're going to spend the most of our time. We're also going to hit all the parts, but this is really helpful. Thanks, everyone.
So if you look at this slide, these are some of IM's important beliefs about students and teachers. Teachers are curious about and trust student thinking to drive learning. Today, we hope to address strategies that Marcel, some of our colleagues, and I have used to preserve that unique design of routines in IM that elevate student thinking, and even in the remote setting. So here's our question. How can we best preserve the unique design and routines of IM in a remote setting? To get us started, we thought we'd have a little live action here. This is imagine your February school vacation being transported to Los Angeles to meet with a class of TK and kindergarten students who you've never met before to do a lesson. This is just a snippet from that amazing learning community. Is how many do you see? You know about this one. Can I see your head and shoulders in the window so I know I have your eyes? Oh, look at these mathematicians. What a beautiful math community. All right, are you ready? I'm going to show you a picture and you're going to think in your head, how many do I see and how do I see them? Ready? Look at this picture. Okay, I'm going to put it away. Who would like to tell me how many you see and how you see them? I see Joshua showing it in the window. Joshua, will you unmute and tell us what you see?
I see 3 red counters and 3 yellow counters.
I saw you hold your fingers up and you made I saw your fingers and I saw you doing 3 in one hand and 3 on the other hand. Is that what you did? You saw 3 red and 3 yellow. And now, did you just put them all together? You changed your fingers. I saw you do 3 plus 3. And now you changed it to look like this. What does this? How many is this, Joshua?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
6. Nice job. Did anyone see this a different way than Joshua did? Did anybody think about it in a different way? You could raise your hand. Oh, somebody was stretching. I thought they were raising their hand. All right, let's look at the next one. Ready? Here we go. How many do you see and how do you see them? What did you see? Can somebody tell me? Was it too fast? Do you need one more look? Who saw it? Can you give me a thumbs up if you saw the picture? What did you see? Oh, Grace is telling me. Grace, will you unmute and say what you saw?
Yeah,
What did you see, Grace?
I see 6.
How did you see 6? What did it look like? How many red and how many yellow?
4 reds.
You saw 4. Oh,
2 yellow.
you know what, Grace, you can write on the screen if you would like to show me how you saw it. Do you know how to do that right on the screen? I think I saw Aileen. No?
No.
Aileen, do you want to write on the screen how you saw them? I saw
It's
you.
Kilani. I know how to write on the screen.
All right, would you like to say how you saw them? How many did you see and how did you see them?
On the yellow side, I see 2.
You see 2 on the yellow side?
Yep, I know how to color it.
Okay, good, you do it.
I
You do it.
didn't try it, but I can only see.
You see 4 red and 2 yellow. You said that made 6. Nice job, Grace. Nice job, Delaney. All right, let's look at the next one. Are you ready? Yeah, oh, I have to clear that good word. All right, ready? Everybody look. What do you see? What do you see? Let's see if we can get somebody different to talk about it. What do you, Noah, do you see, or Samuel, or Justin, or Melinda, or Megan? How many? What did you see? Show me in the window how many you saw. Joshua is Justin's showing me. Let's see who's showing. Aileen, how many? Should I show again? Oh, Samuel, will you unmute and say how many you saw?
I see 6.
And how did you see 6 this time?
I see them with my eyes.
You saw them with your eyes. And with your eyes, how many red ones did you see?
5.
And how many yellow ones did you see with your eyes?
I see 1.
1. And how did you know it was 6 altogether? How did you know that, Samuel?
Because I count them.
You counted them. How did you count them? Can you tell me how you counted them? Did you go? Tell me.
I can draw them.
Oh, please, you draw it. Grace knows how to do it now too. Let Samuel show how he counted them. Okay? You can write right on there, Samuel.
Okay.
Okay?
I'll give you a bigger.
So did you see all of them at the same time? How did you count? Did you think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Or did you think 3 plus 3? Or did you think 5 plus 1? What did you do?
I touch and count.
You touched and count. That's a really good strategy. Let's do the strategy that Samuel used. Let's touch and count. Ready? Let's do it together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nice job. Thank you, Samuel. All right. I have an important question to ask everyone. What was the same about all of those images? I'm going to do a quick. Is how many do you?
I could look at those children all day, but in the interest of your time,
I'm going to pause here, and I got a real kick out of the the connections to Romper Room, because Miss Jean never saw Maureen when I was a girl. So I'm enjoying your chat. We were headed to the synthesis where these students did an amazing job making the connection that each one of these images, while different in the amount of red and yellow, they each represented 6. And it was just a terrific lesson. So we said what was the same about each one, and they talked about the numbers comprising 3 plus 3. Another one had 4 red and 2 yellow, 5 red and 1 yellow. They were different and yet the same. So that was kind of a little happy way to start us off. I have a good job. And I thought you'd enjoy seeing it from the other side. So there I am, Miss Jean, Romper Room, whatever you want to say, looking at this sea of absolutely amazing children who just met me. This was February, and they were able to change the chat to a direct message to me. They responded about the puppies, just like you did, just incredible. And we went through the whole lesson. We ended up making connections about different ways to represent 6. So really, really fun. I wanted to show this image because not to show you my messy office, but to show you that I have this large monitor connected to my smallish computer, and it made all the difference in the world to be able to look at the children and see when they're trying to get my attention or show their thinking, and be able to have the content fully available too. So I mean, I always have my chat right up here ready for them as well. So that's that.
My 8th grade classroom was in many ways less heartwarming than Maureen's, but I wanted to share with you my experience with Stronger and Clearer Each Time. This is a fantastic routine that's included in the illustrative math curriculum. It's one of the 8 math language routines because of the particular purpose it has, which is posted there. This routine is lively in class. Students are standing up, they're talking to each other, they're walking around the room. And I found that early on in distance learning that I was reluctant to try routines that felt fun and exciting and engaging in a virtual setting, because I had that feeling of, well, what if students don't talk in the breakout rooms? And what if everybody just sits there? Or what if they talk about something else? Or all of that fear just came up in this new setting. And yet, when I just presented problems from workbooks and asked students to work on them, and then sort of tried to share some stuff out, it was clear that they needed a more structured and supportive way to work with the material. So just to give you a sense, this is some material from my 8th grade class through Zoom. So I invited students to work on these problems independently. Depending on the class and their mood, sometimes they went into a breakout room of 1 to just take 5 minutes in your breakout room of 1 and think through these problems. And sometimes I invited them just to stay in the Zoom room together, but I invited all of my students to turn their camera off for a few minutes of quiet sync time. And then I invited them to turn their camera back on when they were ready to share. Zoom fatigue is real, and I found that explicitly giving students some off-camera time made their on-camera time a little bit more easy and more likely to happen. After they tried these, they also had to work on these next problems. Take a few seconds to look at problems 2 and 3 and think about where students might struggle. In my class, after problem 2, I could see, yep, exactly, Renee. I could see that things started to get a little loose. And the I am lesson suggests using the math language routine Stronger and Clearer. So you'll see on this next slide that this is what students were able to come up with just through independent work time. Oh, I'm sorry. You'll see on this slide the Stronger and Clearer Each Time routine. So just to give you a sense of this, students do a first draft. And what you'll see is the first draft they do is really just done during independent work time. In person, we would do a structured pair meeting and then switch partners and repeat. And in Zoom, what we do is have students go into breakout rooms with a partner, sometimes in groups of 3, especially if I know there's a kid who maybe isn't going to participate at all. Then most groups were really randomly assigned, but I strategically partnered students who I knew were going to need a particularly sort of supportive partnership. So now you'll see on this next slide what students were able to come up with independent work time. These are 4 examples. And you'll notice that there are only 3 things written because it's pretty representative that one kid just has nothing. Then they got to go into partnerships, talk with a partner, and then think some more. And then go into a new breakout room and go into partnerships. And then they were invited back to revise. And on this next slide, this is what they did on revision.
Wow. Wow.
What I love about this routine and what I think is important to highlight here is that after 2 partner meetings, student work was much stronger and clearer. But there's also a misconception here. These are not 4 perfect answers. But it is very clear to me after this, after I've had the time to really watch and monitor student work, that there is a misconception about dividing horizontal distance by vertical distance. And it's something that now that every single student has an answer, all students are ready for the activity and lesson syntheses. This is something that if you are doing this during a synchronous setting, you might do this in breakout rooms, but I also know that sometimes breakout rooms are unavailable to you. So you could create a Jamboard or a deck of Google Slides for each student, then invite students to pair up with the slide before them and give a little bit of feedback, and then the slide after them and give a little feedback. Students are also invited in this routine to take excellent ideas that they hear from their peers. In an asynchronous setting, you can use discussion board technology to support all students. Tools like text-to-speech, allowing students to share audio files of their comments or revisions, and allowing, when possible, for students to respond in the language they feel most comfortable communicating in, can all support students in engaging with and accessing the content. Even in an asynchronous setting, it's important to remember that sharing thinking with partners and getting feedback helps students feel seen, and is also just going to help them combat some of the isolation of learning from home. Instructional routines support our efforts to act on the beliefs that students have experiences and ideas that are valuable, even through the challenge of distance learning. I want to invite everybody to think a little bit about how we can leverage instructional routines to ensure students are experiencing problem-based learning. I want to invite you to just think on this a little bit and type a response to this question in the chat. What are you thinking right now? And then we're going to see a few more examples of how teachers from around the country have used these routines.
Jessica.
All right, thanks for starting us off, Jessica. Yeah, I think this idea of really like trusting students to do what you're asking them to do. And here's the other thing that I've learned. So much of distance learning is an exercise in relinquishing control. And I found like setting things up and just expecting that students are going to follow through and giving them the opportunity to do that really, really helped them. And yeah, I think it is absolutely super important to be thoughtful about pairing and grouping students. And there are great ways in Zoom to set up breakout rooms. I had my 8th graders in the same groups for several weeks at a time so they could really get to know each other. All right, I want to show us some other ideas of different ways that we can think about these routines. Oh my gosh, these people are getting into such great ideas. I love it. So this slide and the next several are from conversations with teachers using IM in the past year, including conversations happening on Twitter. These teachers are sharing a window into their classroom, and I want to acknowledge that your distance learning setup might not be exactly the same, but I'm hoping that these anecdotes and ideas are going to give you some just ways that might help you adapt your setup. So this teacher, my colleague Gabe, who's also a New York City teacher, uses whole group Zoom with students typing their noticing and wondering into the chat, then waiting for quiet sync time before everyone presses enter at once. And then, and this is really important, he then, after sort of seeing it in the chat, invites specifically selected students to share more, and he annotates on a shared whiteboard, in this case using a Jamboard. Another teacher used Desmos Activity Builder to show a notice and wonder. She found that it was really important to have the noticing prompts and the wondering prompts in two separate slides so that students were really encouraged to sort of share both. So we can see these noticings and we can also see these wonderings. In an asynchronous setting, we have another teacher that's using Google Slide Decks and Google Classroom to have each student type into their own document. If you don't use Google Slides, it's a lovely way to have students share their thinking in a single document, but not with the trouble of like they're all typing in the same Word document and then their cursor moves. It's a nice sort of isolated space. What she does is she invites students to complete this. She allows students to respond in the language they feel most comfortable. And then she mines these so that she can have an impactful share when students come back all together to highlight important work. Many teachers were also using Which One Doesn't Belong, which is all over the IM curriculum and something that I think teachers and students all love. They used breakout rooms in many cases, which might not be an option in virtual settings. So this teacher used Padlet for asynchronous sharing. Each item is its own image and students respond with reasons for as many they can. And again, they can use voice, they can use text. This teacher used Canvas with an asynchronous discussion prompt and encourages students to respond to each other's ideas. And then this is my favorite. This is Becky in spring of 2020. And set up Zoom with a physical chart paper taped to the wall. She calls on students by drawing names from a popsicle stick jar. Something that it's worth remembering is that most of us, our main experience of teaching and learning is in the physical classroom. And I think this last teacher is a reminder that we can still make some of this work even in a virtual setting.
So Which One Doesn't Belong really works lovely in a remote or an in-person setting. In this third grade example, I would use that countdown to chat method and ask each student, which one doesn't belong? And I would give them that minute of think time that's scripted right into our curriculum notes, because everybody needs time to think and have a deep look at the material. And then even remotely, I had them turn and talk to a partner. And sometimes I would say, turn and tell your invisible partner. And we thought that was hysterical. And then after a while, we had a collection of students coming with either their pet or their blue bunny, someone that they could tell, because it's so important for every student to put their thinking into the air during these routines. That can be a great rehearsal time for some students to get their thinking organized. And it also is a chance for students who may not want to volunteer for the whole class share to be able to talk. So here, this was done in person. I just was in class for this third grade, and these were their in-person notes. So, you know, students are thinking about it all different ways. And I thought it was interesting, even though the lesson was in person, my fabulous colleague, Andrea Welch, had the students do the card sort that came next on their Chromebooks. And it was like this. they got their Chromebooks, they opened up to Google Classroom, she had assigned it, and they were doing sorting much quicker than anybody could be passing out cards and getting spread out on the rug. So I thought that was interesting, although I do love a good card sort on the rug. And then all students were ready to complete the next task, which was writing equations that match situations and diagrams. So here we have an estimation exploration. The image is a little bit cut off, but we were looking at an image and we had another jar next to it that showed what 100 looked like. So you can see in the chat, students are making their predictions. We asked about what would be a too low estimate, a too high, and then about a just right. And you can notice that these are all set to direct message, because at this point in the lesson, I don't want students to feel pressured by what other students are thinking. And let's see, as Shannon mentioned in the chat today, after we did the warm-up, then sent it to the chat, then students would go into a fishbowl setting to do partner talk. And Shannon, you mentioned that you use that. So then these two students volunteered to be partners, just like we would have been at the rug, to turn and talk to each other. And they just were both in Spotlight for Everyone, and they would talk back and forth as if they were knee to knee on the rug. And then the rest of us would watch them in the fishbowl and give them feedback too about the great partner talk that they did. So is this going to be you, or me, Marcel? We just wanted to say that each of us has a unique distance learning setting, and you have to take into consideration your setting and your resources. But we want to think about how are we going to incorporate these critical structures that really keep student thinking at the center of everything we do. So let's use the chat again, and please type in and tell us, what do you think the structures are that are crucial to incorporate in distance learning? Yeah, participation. We need to hear those student voices. No matter whatever we do, we've got to keep that student thinking at the center. Marcella, I'll have you weigh in here, but that social emotional connection is huge.
And I think it's important now to think about some of how we build that community, right? Because we're all concerned about social and emotional learning. So let's take a look at it.
Okay. So yes, so funny you should mention creating that safe mathematical community. Really, I think that was the bedrock for being able to do I am in person and I am in a distance setting. And we just had some different moves when we were remote, but we had to work it so that every student felt safe to share his or her ideas. So right now we're going to talk about what does it look like and sound like to create that safe math community, and how will we build it? So we started off with different puppies. This is the puppy slide I used with those little kindergarten students, and they loved it. And they did a great job with it. So I found one of these cat check-ins, and I brought it with me to every one of my classes. And students who are kind of like this in their chair sat up and leaned in and were able to choose who they felt like and talk to each other about how they were feeling the same as each other. And so I thought to myself, wait a minute, this is losing some valuable capital here. Let's make this about us. Let's use this as a time to learn about each other. So I made check-ins about my beautiful little grand dog, Rev, who I'm raising. And I had a series of these, and we loved it. And they would see Rev on Zoom sitting behind me and barking at the mailman. So a few revs went on, and then I said, how about if you make a check-in about something that's important to you? Oh, here first you can see students replying, I feel like 3, I'm so happy today. Just a way to make that little connection. And then this last image is one of the amazing assortment of student-made check-ins. This favorite little doggy bear, sporting a Patriots shirt, taking a rest, having a snack, and working in its I Am Grade 1 workbook. You've got to love that. It really grew what we knew, what was important to each other. And every time someone shared their check-in, we learned a little bit more. We heard about pets, Legos, Nintendos, favorite roller coasters, emojis, wild animals. And it was a low lift for me because students made them, even my first graders. They shared them with me on Seesaw, and that was that. Oh, we had to look at that cute dog one more time.
So in middle and high school, sometimes it feels like our time is a little bit more limited, and it continues to be crucial to build community. So I want to endorse the use of puppy pictures whenever possible, but I also wanted to include a few ideas about ways to check in with high school students. This slide was a result of a quick internet search on Desmos check-in slides. Because I could see all student responses, I could either invite a few students to share or summarize their responses when pressed for time. If I had even more time, I might invite students to go into a breakout room and just let somebody know how they're doing. We also did a lot of these check-ins with blob people. So this was something where I got to invite students to annotate the screen to highlight the blob person that best described how they were feeling. They might be invited to share in the chat a description. I might invite a few students to share why they chose a particular blob. And I think this idea that one of my students shared with me that distance learning was fine, but she said it felt like we have class, but not school. So much of the school experience for students is social, and it's so essential to create, even for a few minutes, some time to check in.
So how do we create that safe community? We welcome all thinking. So this is just an example of students sharing their thinking about similar questions in different ways and welcoming them all, celebrating them, and then using the opportunity to make connections between diverse representations. As we created a math community, you know, with IM, we have really nice explicit instructions during the first couple of weeks of school on moves to make a math community. And I really appreciated this because for my 17 years in my school in mostly second grade classroom, I felt like I had a great class community, but I never specifically made a math community. It wasn't even on my radar. So once this happened, it was really a game changer. Students saw themselves doing what mathematicians do. And we talked about what it looked like and sounded like to do math together. And you can take a look. This is what an in-person math community poster might look like. We create norms for students and teachers. And then we need to be a little bit different when we were remote, but we still had one absolutely with every class. So you can see some things stayed the same. Some things had to be added, like keeping your head and shoulder into the screen, you know, so I wasn't looking at tops of heads in the ceiling, and muting yourself if you're in a noisy situation. And one of my favorite distance learning stories about students owning the classroom was a friend who was writing on the shared screen all the time in first grade. And we were at our wits' end. And my friend Nora, first grader, she said, Miss O'Connell, I think we need the math community poster. So I opened that this document, and she said, I think we need to add that we'll only write on the screen when we ask first. And it was just brilliant to have the first graders feel like they have the power to shape the norms for the classroom. So.
In my 8th grade classroom, we used also these same structures to set up norms. And those 6 lessons that are in the blog post can be used at any time of the school year. I'm particularly excited about the kids who said, we respect ideas and people, and we are mindful that the people around us have feelings. In a distance learning setting, we would need to modify these. So if, and I hope this doesn't happen this year, this class needs to pivot to distance learning. We're going to have to add some things, and notice these additions are largely logistical. Cameras on when we can, share ideas out loud in the chat, close tabs on our laptop, stay off our phones, stay away from video games, keep the chat kind and on topic, and also this idea that we're going to try problems when we're asked to, even if we aren't sure. So these logistical pieces are going to help students figure out how to be in a distance learning setting. So everybody, sorry, go ahead, Maureen.
I was just wondering what strategies you've used to create a safe mathematical community, whether you're in person or distance, or what ideas you're planning to try in the coming weeks. What ideas do you want to have in your back pocket if we have to make that shift, that nimble shift, as I keep hearing? So why don't you go ahead and respond to that in the chat? I can imagine you all typing away or writing down, thinking about the way you're going to do this. John said, invite students to complement one another's thinking or mathematical communication. Absolutely. Celebrating students who are brave to answer. Yes, definitely establishing norms and giving that specific feedback on positive behaviors. Wow, look at all these. I want to save this chat. Yeah.
So now we're going to shift a little bit to think about this idea of problem-based lessons in distance learning. Like, now that we've got this community where students feel like they're sort of ready to share, they're seen, we have norms, how are we going to get them doing these difficult problems together? So when we're thinking about a problem-based classroom, this sort of starts by teacher ensuring everyone understands the questions, students working individually, students working in groups, perhaps in breakout rooms, perhaps on a shared virtual document, while the teacher monitors and listens, and then the teacher helps students synthesize their learning. In a synchronous problem-based classroom, this might look a little bit different. We might see students working individually in a workbook just written down, or by screenshotting. Students work in groups, maybe in breakout rooms, maybe on a live discussion board. And then the teacher is going to bring students back together after looking at their work to synthesize their learning. I have to say that it's something I miss about distance learning, is that I could see everybody's work all at once, and my syntheses were actually better than they are now that I'm back in person. Sometimes we have asynchronous classrooms, and I think it's important to acknowledge that difference. Something that we're going to have students do, again, we're going to have them work on their things individually. Students may collaborate in an asynchronous setting as well through a shared document. And then in the learning synthesis, the teacher needs to be able to select student work to share, and maybe using a math language routine, such as compare and contrast.
As we've already experienced today, that using the chat waterfall or the countdown to a chat is a powerful tool, and direct messaging or private chatting to the teacher is really helpful when students are nervous about sharing their thinking with the whole group. In this image, you can see that we did the routine of a choral count. And as we counted, I recorded the counts, and then we started making notice and wonders. So you can see in the pull-out image of the chat, there are some direct messages, there are some to everyone. Sometimes students would check with me first and then put it into everyone. But it gives wonderful formative information, and it gives me a chance to see what everybody is thinking as we move along. Something that was a game changer was Spotlight for everyone. So we spent some time practicing that. Everybody put their representations or their work in the spotlight, and we were able to see, it was almost like we had a nice gallery walk. And then I could use that opportunity to select and sequence some student work that was going to either raise someone up who was participating or was going to further the learning goal for the lesson. And we did this with also with pages in student workbooks. I could do that scan and see how students were thinking. It really was nice to be able to see. Sometimes students would have both their work and a representation to show in the spotlight. And students did give each other compliments and support around this. The other thing we took time doing was helping students learn how to use their student device as a document camera. So with taking that Chromebook, here this student has just gently pulled his screen towards closing. Not all the way, we learned that. But in that case, we could see everything that would be kind of on their table. And everyone had an opportunity to share. Students who used iPads practiced doing it with their iPads. So here students were using it. This is using his camera, his computer cover just tilted forward. I could see his representation on paper and with his connecting cubes. And here, the nice thing about having them share like this is they're unmuted, so we can still hear all that brilliant thinking as they're explaining how they decided to do what they did. These are some of the iPads that they used. They could sometimes they overlaid their connecting cubes on the workbook itself. And then students would really be giving big verbal descriptions of their work, but it was nice to have that visual as they spoke. We used the Zoom annotation tools. Students were welcome to annotate as the norm said when they asked. Sometimes they did that. They wrote on the screen. They did, so instead of them trying to show their thinking, they just showed their ideas right up for everyone to see. And sometimes they could revise in front of everyone. So this student counted and then said, oh, I need to change my, and we said, that's what mathematicians do. They revise their thinking. And here's, I'm thinking about what Marcel said, to have all of the student work laid out like this, what an opportunity for monitoring, selecting, and sequencing. My 5 practices game was really great using these tools. And in the classroom, you know, you'd have to do a lot of walking and notating to see this is, so there's a one maybe silver lining, right? And then direct messaging as we're monitoring, selecting, and sequencing. I could ask students, would you be willing to share? They could check in with me like 23 or whatever their idea was that they weren't sure about, and I could give them, you know, some confidence, and then they would participate. Joanna said students are good at encouraging each other, and it really is lovely. It's great to see everyone's work. Some, you know, in these, I'm just reading some of your comments. Okay.
In my 8th grade classroom, sometimes I use Nearpod Collaborate boards because they were quick and easy to make and just to add on to the curriculum. It's also something where it allows students to see each other's work. There's a little bit of just community building between students, just like putting hearts next to comments that they appreciated. It's also something where students get to study somebody else's work. There's a subsequent problem in this lesson where students get to try one more time. I want to share a specific story about a launch. So sometimes in the curriculum, activities are launched by inviting students to think a little bit about the math before they do work on independent work. This is sort of in action, the teacher ensuring students understand the question. So students were invited to look at some data, and then they were asked to describe the data. These are a few of these anonymized responses. I looked at these and I used them to select and sequence student responses for a conversation. Rather than sharing their work, I called on students in a specific order. So we can see on this next slide that I'm gonna say like is authentic and not beautiful. But this is what the annotation looked like in my class. I called on the first person that said younger people are more likely to watch television daily that was just doing the bare number work. Then I called on somebody who was like, this seems weird. Then they started to reason through in exactly this order and then moving to the right, thinking about ratios and thinking about percents. After that, students were really ready to try the problems on their own. So it's now important to think about these aspects of problem-based learning. I really want to emphasize this idea of thinking about the importance of the launch and the importance of the synthesis. If we are panicked and we are underplanned, the thing that's going to happen is we are going to lose the moment where we sort of look at student work and synthesize, right? We just sort of throw work at students and we hope that they get it. This has certainly been me at times. And so we really want to think about how we can really pause and be interested in and synthesize student thinking.
Yes, agree, Marcel. And I was certainly guilty many times of like show and share. So all students sharing different amounts of work or different representations of the same problem. But then what I really had to grow my muscle in was making the connections between those different representations so that we could see, well, where do you see the 7 in each one of these? And in a distance setting, you know, we having those items right in front of us, that was a little bit less you know, it made for some easier connections. So here's one of my favorite quotes from Eleanor Duckworth. And I'd like you to think about this for a second. The more intensely interested a teacher is in a student's thinking, the more interested the student becomes in his or her own thinking. And conversely, if we're only interested in answers, then students are not, they're only interested in answers. So the more I would be like fascinated by student thinking, the more the students got into thinking about their thinking, that metacognition, and were really delighted to share their thinking. This week's blog from IM talks about the gift of student thinking, and we'll talk about that some more, but when they give us this gift, what will we do with it?
So now we're going to think a little bit about planning resources for distance learning. This is the moment where I feel like everybody gets a little bit of resource fatigue. There's so much guidance available in illustrative math, and we just want to remind you that it exists and that you're going to build on this and sort of use it when you're ready. So there is unit level guidance. There are recommendations for key synchronous and asynchronous activities. There are lesson summary videos. There are public television videos of IM, and there's the IM Community Hub. All of these resources are helpful. If we think about just planning a unit, there is this huge treasure trove of resources, and Maureen and I want to share with you some of our approaches for planning K-5 and 6 through 12. Something that I want you to think about as we're sort of seeing this is that there's a little bit of redundancy between Maureen and I in terms of the resources, but because the names are a little bit different and the structure of the curriculum is a little bit different, we wanted to share both.
Agree. So when we're thinking about planning a unit K-5, you know, we always think about reading the unit overview and looking at the unit learning goals and doing a deep look and completing the end of unit assessment. so we can see where our students are headed. And then we move to looking at the section overviews and the narratives. And in a distance setting, I would add, then we move to looking at probably the section level planning guides and the adaptation packs, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So, we really want to understand the story of the unit and what students are need to know and be able to do by the end of this of the section. Where are the connections? Which parts would make best whole group setting work? Which parts would be best in a smaller breakout group? Or which things could be done asynchronously? How am I going to assess student understanding as we do these activities?
In 6 through 12, it's similar. Read the unit narrative, consider the learning goals. Do the end of unit assessment, which is going to help you figure out what's non-negotiable. I want to invite you to use the check your readiness assessments. You can make a Google form and students can complete those independently. Analyze their work, and then that'll help you think about what materials from the curriculum adaptation packs and the section level guidance are going to be most useful for you. As you're thinking about planning a section, you really want to think about what students understand and are able to do by the end of the section when you're completing cool downs. And you also might want to think about how to differentiate and use the section level guidance for this. What can students do independently? And what are students going to really need whole class time for? And it'll also help you think about ordering. So this is again, not beautiful because it is real. Week at a glance that I used for planning last year. You'll notice in the week in advance that I had time for revision as part of my whole class. That really allowed me to reach out to students who were not attending consistently, students who needed a breather, gave me time to call students who weren't coming and really try to engage them. I also had asynchronous time where students were doing practice problems. I also didn't always complete all of the lesson in a given time. And that also felt important. Another thing just to know is that there are video lesson summaries. At some point, I must have been feeling really extra. And I put in some checking questions and some multiple choice by using a Nearpod video editor, just so students were encouraged to watch those video lesson summaries and engage with them a little bit. The last thing we sort of want you to keep in mind, because we're talking a little bit about cutting and making instructional choices, this unit dependency chart is a significant maze, but it's important to think about it when you're thinking about ordering, pacing, and emphasizing units, because this is going to help you decide where you're going to bend coherence and when you're going to break coherence. I also would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to have us think a little bit about unfinished learning, which is a topic that always deserves its own webinar, but particularly now. I want you to think about this maze and notice that there are arrows that point from 7th grade through to geometry. Teachers often cut materials that aren't power standards or key standards or tested standards until unit 7 of grade 7 is essentially a triangle appreciation unit. Very little of what happens is going to feel like a deal breaker for students to know in 7th grade. But I want to invite you to think about the learning gaps that you have seen with your own students. My students struggle the most with geometry and statistics because their previous teachers have made choices that I understand to cut some crucial understanding. You're not just setting your students up for success this year, but you really want to think about setting students up for success in the future. The curriculum adaptation packs and section level guidance are going to help you decide where to emphasize and where to cut so that you're sure that students get exposure to essential content.
For the curriculum adaptation packs, these were essential last year when we were in our distance setting. So for every unit that we were going to teach, not kindergarten because they have that wonderful fresh start, but for every unit, we would look at the adaptation packs and look at what the grade level authors had suggested as just a sprinkle of a few just-in-time lessons from the prior grade that could be used to give everyone a shared experience, to grow their math identity, to feel confident and comfortable. And then after that handful of lessons from the prior grade, we got right into grade level work because that's where we want to have our students. But just those few lessons were recommended, some before the beginning of the unit and some before either section B or section C. They also gave us 1 or 2 question assessments that could be used as a check-in whether or not we needed to use them. And it really made a big difference. The other piece that was so important when we, for some schools that weren't meeting in person every day with students, is thinking about this section level guidance. So you can recognize it at with every every day we're talking about illustrative mathematics, having that welcome, that deep dive and learning, and then the consolidation. And here you can see that welcome through explore, play, and discuss, that deep dive, and then the consolidation. So in the section level packs, it would name within a section what you, if you have to omit something, what you shouldn't, what were the really deep dive items, and what things might be done asynchronously. And it also helped to consider what could be best to leverage student discussion and do when you have everybody together in a virtual meeting. So those are essential.
There are also unit at a glance documents available that will help you prioritize and plan to think about where you can find things. We have 6 through 12 unit at a glance documents prepared, and the K-5 ones are coming soon. The other thing I want to highlight is that there are block schedule guidance. I find it very useful, even though I don't use block scheduling, because it helps prioritize where students are learning new things, and thinking about like what you may want to cut or edit or what you might want to emphasize. If you have a question in general, an illustrative math blog post exists for that. A lot of what we've referenced today offers us opportunities to do research and get questions answered through the blog. If there isn't a blog post for that, we also want to invite you to join the Illustrative Math Community Hub. It's a community of teachers of illustrative math authored curricula and people who support them. You'll find resources and connections with other IM educators, and it's just a wonderful space to get additional information about whatever problem that you are trying to solve with your classroom.
So you may have seen this image, a world where all learners know, use, and enjoy mathematics. And it really was joy, even across a distance with IM. And so we are delighted to share. We want to just remind you that we want to maintain the focus on student thinking and leverage the positive belief about students being capable mathematicians. We've applied the universal design for learning to support students with disabilities and English learners. And we just want to position students for brilliance front and center within your classroom. So right now, there's Marcel.
So just another reminder that if you work with one of our certified partners, contact them to learn more about the features their platforms offer for distance learning. And now we're going to open it up for a question and answer session. So we invite you to use the question and answer feature to share your questions. And we're going to invite Greta and Sadie to help us prioritize.
I think, sorry, I don't know if I should put my video on or not, but I'm going to put my video on. And I'm going to start with one question that we had. And it was a great question, but I'm learning about the Q&A, and apparently when you, even if you respond like, great question, we'll ask that, then it gets answered. So I have to find it again. the question was this was from participant that says, how is each student's math learning assessed in the collaborative session or alone?
Well, in the elementary classroom, we were always monitoring. So we're thinking about, once we, as Marcel said, students understand what they're working on, teachers are monitoring and listening to conversations. And so, that can be done if students are in breakout rooms by dropping in, by what they're sharing in the chat, and by what they share with the whole group. Marcel, would you want to add on to that?
Yeah, in terms of assessment, I asked students to complete cool downs, not as many as I would in a normal lesson, but I invited them to complete cool downs and gave them feedback. Also gave tests. Again, this is something that's a bummer about my paper pencil tests, even though they're better in almost every way. I really enjoyed giving tests by making just transforming the test into a Google form. I think it depends a little bit on who's asking this question, but I know that middle school and particularly high school teachers are obsessed with the potential that students are cheating. And I'm going to say that students absolutely Google answers and try to solve equations using photo math. And that is something that we cannot control. But I invited students to take a test, go into a breakout room of one. I made it so that they had to submit it by a certain time. I messaged families at home and said, we're having a test today. I was, pretty strict about sort of when it was available and for how long. And also when students Googled answers, it was really obvious and a little it was just frustrating. But it was like most students really just did well with assessments, and I looked at them, and we one of the nice things is, again, I could really differentiate my classroom and pull small groups in a much more private way when students were really struggling.
And Marcella, I'm glad you said, of course, the cool downs right from kindergarten. There are checklists for teachers to look at during the work, and then there are written cool downs to check in after each lesson, which we used. We did them using different interactive, sometimes Pear Deck or Seesaw, or whatever worked best for a teacher. So and gave the unit assessments and the written section checklists, checkpoints. Excuse me. I see a question about how long did it take for students to develop the skills to be able to share. It took maybe the first couple of sessions. We had to, just like in my responsive classroom, you have to practice, you have to have explicit directions about how to do it, and then everybody practiced, and we gave specific feedback about how wonderful that was, and then coached students through it. But they're, pretty amazing with technology. And someone asked about student created check-ins. How did I decide who's to share? So we had a schedule. So as they came in, we put them in one for each day, and there was time for everyone. And some people during the course of the rest of the year maybe did 5. So when we would have a vacancy, they'd be ready to jump in. And I always had extras ready to go too. Good question.
I want to invite if there are any lingering questions that are coming up that you would like to. Oh, okay. Sure. I'm going to take this one, Maureen, and I want to invite you to I'm going to start, and then Maureen's going to bring it home. The difference between the exploration math of illustrative math versus the traditional I do, we do, you do model. Why is this better? I feel like I have a couple of answers to this, and I'm going to sort of try out, and then we'll bring it home. So one idea is that students need to have the opportunity to explore. Students often need to be able to sort of, before they're ready to be told something, they need to kind of come to understand it and have some time that they spend with it. And so for that reason, illustrative math stance is that problem-based learning works. my experience with I do, we do, you do, I want to say there is a place for direct instruction, and illustrative math also understands there's a place for direct instruction. The shift is sort of to a you do, y'all do, we do. And when we think about that, students get the opportunity to try. Students get an opportunity to collaborate with peers. It decenters the teacher as the person and the only person who's capable of telling students whether they're right or wrong. When I teach in a direct instruction model, the classroom is full of students raising their hand or sort of like almost squeaking, like chirping little birds, asking, did I do it right? Tell me if I did it right. And then they get so mad. I don't know. How could, like, figure it out, think about it. But that's not to say there's not support, right? Because I had a student who said, Miss Good only gives us problems. She never teaches us anything. And the idea of that is when you're transparent, and this was also earlier in my experience with illustrative math, the lesson synthesis and the activity syntheses really allow you to bring student work in and student voice into your classroom, and then share with them, here are a few ways that we might consider doing it. By all means, when my students do not offer something that is a strong way to solve a problem, the lesson synthesis is when I teach it. But I think understanding students having some experience to get their feet wet first means that by the time I have to actually tell them something, they're hungry to receive it because it's the missing piece they need to solve a problem. Maureen, I just want to invite any thoughts you have.
Yeah, beautifully said, Marcel. And I just wanted to reiterate, this problem-based lesson structure keeps student thinking at the center of everything. So instead of us generating, like, you could do this or you could do that, here it's coming from the class, and students are co-creating understanding. So Grace's ideas build on with Jacob's idea, and by the end, we're all better together. And it isn't just all left out there. We have that synthesis where we stamp, this is what the important math learning is for the day, so that there is an opportunity for the teacher to tie it all together in the synthesis. And I love what Marcel said. We believe students should play around with math ideas before we give them formal definitions or formulas or something like that. And one of my colleagues, Kelly, said she loved it because the baton was passed from the teacher to the students in IM, so that it's a we, like what we're doing in our math community. So that was just what I wanted to add.
I do want to add one more thing, because the question also was, why is this better? And I'm just going to go ahead and say, I usually don't say why it's better, but I'm going to say in this case, I think if we, and I'm drawing on Zaretta Hammond's work on culturally responsive teaching and the brain. Everybody sort of wonders, or there's a lot of thinking about how we can be more culturally responsive in our teaching. And I think one of the concerns that I have, particularly with students who struggle the most with math, is that they tend to be very dependent learners. They need me to tell them if they're right. They're not going to start work until I exactly coach them through every single step. And that's not actually what mathematics is. And I value students to be able to solve novel problems and to think independently. And the way I show them that I value that is I invite them to solve problems and to think independently, because that's how they're going to learn. My classroom, I cannot remember, I'm thinking really hard, I can't think of a single instance where a student asked me if they did a problem right this year. Not that they don't care that they didn't do it right or that they did, but because they really are becoming independent learners. And when you have a classroom full of independent learners where students trust their thinking and where I trust their thinking, one, sometimes they really do have ideas that surprise and delight me and delight each other, but also that if I'm the only person in the room who has the knowledge, it's not a community. It's not an enjoyable classroom, which is not to say I don't tell them things. I tell them things all the time.
Absolutely.
But I tell them when they're ready, and
Yeah.
I know that they're ready because I have a really good sense of how much they know coming in.
Yeah. Becca Phillips has a great blog about that. holding the vocabulary until it's like there's a hunger for it and it means so much more than so. And just as an example, today I was talking with a first grade teacher and I asked her how it was going, and she said, it's going really well. My students are doing really well with all types of story problems, and they get into all of them. And she said they really seem to understand, you know, what it is, which unknown that they're looking for. And they're really seeming to be making sense of the situations and the story problems. And I do think that that the way that it's presented, we're growing sense makers, you know, instead of like people who are pulling numbers out of stories. It really is positioning students to be lifelong mathematicians.
I am noticing that the Q&A is empty. I am noticing that it is 5:20 on the East Coast and we have been together for 80 minutes. I'm going to put out one last invitation. If anybody has remaining burning questions, we're happy to answer them. But I also want to acknowledge that it's been a long day.
Yeah.
And we appreciate you. We appreciate your energy.
Oh, teachers, I see you. We see you. And, you know, you care so much. We care so much on making things the best that we can for our students. So it's amazing after a long day or in the middle of a long day, depending on your time zone, that you're here with us. And I look forward to talking with you. I am on Twitter. I did put my Twitter handle. Oh, I'm so old lady on Twitter, but I love to continue the conversation. And shall I show our closing slide here? If we don't hear from anyone else in the Q&A.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We always invite, we really value check-ins. We check in with each other. We also value reflections. So take a minute. You can share it in the chat if you want, but you're also welcome to just have this be a personal reflection in your mind or on that piece of paper you have handy. Think about what you've heard today. How do these ideas connect with what you already know? What new ideas did you get that extend or push your thinking? What is now a challenge for you to get your mind around? What questions do you now have? Or, especially if you feel overwhelmed, what is one small next step that you want to take to your classroom tomorrow or when you need to be in virtual? I want to invite you. Maureen has shared her Twitter handle in the chat. If you'd like to share a reflection with us in the chat, we'd like to invite you to do so. Otherwise, thank you for coming and learning with us today.
Absolutely. I think sometimes in these crazy times, just taking one thing, like one next step, when I go to something professional, if I can come back and immediately try to try one new thing, I feel like I've made a good progress.
I appreciate Jessica's stating that she's going to check in and do a synthesis even when pressed for time. One thing I want to say, and this is just another plug for synthesizing, when we had to shift to distance learning very quickly in New York City in March of 2020, one of my students who I had for 2 years said, "Miss Good, I missed the part of the lesson where you told us exactly what we were supposed to understand for the day, because I just feel like I did a bunch of problems and I don't know what to remember." And it really, like, one, it made me sad because I wasn't doing my whole job. And two, I was really proud that like the structure had been working for her for a year and a half and she noticed it and she missed it. So especially in distance learning where everything feels so much the same every day, synthesizing is going to be so important for your kids.
And I think that's a great last word. I do want to tell you, I also have a series of check-ins called This or That. And if you look on the internet, you'll find, is it a blueberry muffin or a chihuahua? And some days when we didn't have a student check-in, these just were a good laugh for everybody. Students would lean in and try to figure out what it was. Is it a bagel or a puppy? And it took less than a minute, but it was enough to bring us all a smile and set us on a positive course for the lesson.
Maureen, you get the last word.
And we thank you. And I've loved being with Marcel, and it makes me so excited to think about a world where students start in kindergarten knowing that they're mathematicians and they get to grow up in this kind of a positive space. We won't have people running around saying, I'm not a math person anymore, I hope. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for being here. Thank you, Greta and Sadie, for your wonderful support.
Oh yeah, thanks Greta and Sadie for